I teach Parsha Baruch Hashem once a week. I also teach Siddur here. I teach all my favorite things. Some speakers have one speech and they say it over and over again. But by the second time, I'm boring. By the third time, I'm boring myself. So I like to give new talks. I don't like to repeat the same talks over and over again. Part of the reason I like to repeat new material is because I have a website and I can't put the same class up 10 times. But it requires more work. If every year I want to give a different topics, I have to research and have to do and da-da. Something interesting happened this year, which is getting me to repeat a class that I gave once before. I'm a little bit torn. I found the class on my website with it's a good class. I said, oh no, how can I give the class? I already gave it, but I need to give it again. I'll tell you why. Parshas Acharei talks about three things. The first three aliyahs, that means Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Chitas, which we did 3 times, talk about Yom Kippur. Wednesday and Thursday talk about what's called basically shchutei chutz, bringing a korban outside the Beis Hamikdash, both sprinkling the blood as well as offering up the organs. It's a very big aveda to do that, and along with that comes the isser of eating blood and so on. The third topic of our parsha is arayos. All the laws of adultery and some of the laws of avodah zarah are in our parsha, Parshas Acharei. Next week, Kedushim, we repeat them all a second time. It's very strange. Acharei Kedushim, which are often read together, Parshas Acharei, there's 2 aliyahs that deal with arayos. Parshas Kedushim has 2 more aliyahs that deal with the same arayos. And I gave a class on that also. Because any aveda, for which the punishment is death, you have to have it twice. It's called azhara and oynish. You have to be warned separately, don't do it, and then you have to be told separately what the punishment is. So all the azhares, all the warning is against Gilui Arayos on this week's parsha. All the einshim, all the punishments for one who has done Gilui Arayos is in next week's parsha, Parshas Kedushim. And like I said, often we read those 2 parshas on the same Shabbos. One of the most controversial ideas in the whole Torah is this situation called Azazel. Azazel means that on Yom Kippur, to use my form, to use my structure, how I like to teach it, there are 3 layers. A regular day has 1 layer. Shabbos and Yom Tov have 2 layers. We call it Musaf. And Yom Kippur has 3 layers. The layer of the everyday, the layer of the Shabbos and Yom Tov, which is called Musaf. And both of those types of avodah are done in what's called Big Day Zahav, the regular 8 garments of the Kohen Gadol that are demarked by gold. And then there is avodas pnim. Yom Kippur has the 3rd layer, which is done in the Holy of Holies, basically. And for this, the Kohen Gadol dafka does not wear gold. He dafka does not wear bells that make noise. It's very quiet. He wears bad white linen, and he goes into the Holy of Holies. Basically, the avodas pnim, the highest madrega of Yom Kippur. And by the way, kabbalistically, the regular avodah is between Atzilus and Bria. The Shabbos Yom Tov avodah is Atzilus, and the Yom Kippur avodah is higher than Atzilus. That's how it plays out in math of Kabbalah. The avodas pnim basically has 3 or 4 things, depending on how you want to count it. Number 1, there's part of his Sor Shem Kippurim. There's a bullocks, which the Kohen Gadol pays for out of his own pocket, which he says vidoy for himself and for his family and for all Koyanim. Then there is a Sa'ir Chatos, which we pay for, the Jewish people pay for, which is our kapara for Mikdash v'Kadishav, and the Kohen for all of the Jewish people. And then there is something called Sa'ir HaMishtaleach, the second goat. They take 2 he-goats, they put them in the Azara. This is how you compare Purim to Yom Kippur. Purim is all about Goydel. Yom Kippur's central avodah is Goydel. They take 2 he-goats, one on the right of the coin, one on the left of the coin. He'd put his hand into a special basket. He'd pull out 2 plates of gold. One plate of gold said La Hashem. The other plate of gold said La Azazel, and he placed them on the 2 goats. And it was considered a good siman if the goat on his right said La Hashem, and the goat on his left said La Azazel. It was considered a bad siman if the goat on his right said La Azazel, and the goat on his left said La Hashem. And the last avodah done in the Holy of Holies was the Keteiros. He was special pan of Keteiros was brought to the Holy of Holies. He would put it down, he would burn it, he would wait for the whole room to become full of smoke, and then he would walk out. So Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year. Right? The way we like to say it, it's the Yechid of Zman, Yechid of Mokim, Yechid of Nefesh. The holiest person, the Kohen Gadol. In the holiest place, the Kedusha HaKadoshim. On the holiest day, Yom Kippur, converge. Yom Kippur is one of those days that the Kohen Gadol has to do everything soup to nuts. Nobody does anything except the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol has to do the Talmud Shal Shachar. The Kohen Gadol has to light the menorah. The Kohen Gadol has to bring the Ketores and the inner Mizbeach. All the regular avodas, the weekday avodas and the musaf have to also be done by the Kohen Gadol. But of course, the trademark, the distinction of Yom Kippurim is the different avodas that are done by Big Love with white linen. And one of them is Azazel. Azazel is a very controversial situation. It is, it's very controversial. You know what's controversial? I'll say straight to the point. It's controversial because we're religious Jews, you know, we're Orthodox Jews. Religious Jews believe in Achdus, that there's one power, only one. Only God has power, nobody else has any power. That's what a religious Jew believes. If nobody else has power besides for Hashem, you should not fear anybody but Hashem. Especially the Kohen Gadol, especially in Kedusha HaKadoshim, especially on Yom Kippur, the holiest person in the holiest time, in the holiest place. There should be nothing to fear but God. People like you and I, we also believe in Achdus. We also believe that there's nothing to fear but God. But nevertheless, we're not going to walk into the street of Eastern Parkway when cars are traveling, whatever it is. They used to travel 40 miles an hour. They reduced them to 14 miles an hour, all in the name of love and pacifism and apathy and masks. But still, you wouldn't move into moving cars in Eastern Parkway. You know, when the Rebbe crossed the street, he never looked. The Rebbe used to cross in the middle of the street and never looked. He used to cross Eastern Parkway. The Rebbe's mother took an apartment on Kingston and St. John's. And the Rebbe used to go visit her every day. He would cross Eastern Parkway in the middle of the street and never hesitate. And the cars would stop short and they would honk and they would screech and they would beep and they would walk across the street. He never looked. The Rebbetzin moved apartment because she was so afraid of the Rebbe getting hurt. Because they used to walk Eastern Parkway every day. Not at the corner and not at the light. In other words, didn't wait for green, just walked. And the Rebbe's mother took a place on President in Kingston because the Rebbe chose to cross Eastern Parkway. And I heard from a teacher of mine that the Rebbe once crossed Kingston Avenue and the car stopped very short and beeped like, who's this Meshuggah? The Rebbe didn't look. Now my personal belief is, if you do that, you're a suicide mission, Meshuggah. A Rebbe is not allowed to look because in the Rebbe's world there's taka only God. If there's only God, why should he look at the car? The car is God. The God's not going to hurt him unless he wants to. In other words, some tzaddikim are not allowed to make a keli and tava. This is my interpretation. But it is a known fact that the Rebbe would cross Eastern Parkway in the 1940s. The cars were going a lot faster than they're going now. It was 3 lanes on either side, and he wouldn't hesitate, just walk, and the car stopped. Right. That's my opinion. This doesn't say anything. That's my opinion. The Rebbe would not hesitate, just walk across the street. Then the cars would stop and screech and curse, and he walked across the street. I would imagine that there aren't. But Rabbi Yossi told me, he put it on a video. I have it on my computer someplace. The Rebbe was once crossing Kingston. He used to walk up Kingston to see his mother. But he didn't cross at the corner. He crossed in the middle of the block on an angle to save time. And the cars are flying and the Rebbe's walking across the street. Anyway, so you would think that on the holiest day of the year, in the holiest place, the holiest man, there should be only God. Azazel is understood by many of the Mefarshim as a bribe to Klipa. You have to pacify Klipa on Yom Kippur, and because you have to pacify, you want to leave you alone, so you throw him a bone, eat your bone, and the Vaila the Kohen Gadol gets away with it. To me, this is so difficult. It's always bothered me. It bothered me very much. And like I said, I have a class which today I found. I gave it 8 years ago, and I have my notes from then. It was a good class. I did a lot of research. I could see all the material that I prepared. Why am I giving it again? I'm giving it again because for this Pesach they published a Maimer. They found in the Rebbe's library a bunch of Maimorim of the Rebbe Rashab that they didn't know they had. They didn't find them in Russia. They were not purchased at some auction in Jerusalem. In the Rebbe's library there was a bunch of Maimorim of the Rebbe Rashab that they had all these years and they didn't know they had them. So for this, in the Rebbe's library, a bunch of Maimorim from the Rebbe Rashab, from Tafresh Samach Beis, that they didn't know they had, and they were in the library the whole time, and they published the Maimer for Pesach, and it's a Yom Kippur Maimer. The name of the Maimer is Tafresh Samach Beis, The Maimer is not in the original hand of the Rebbe Rashab. It was written by a great Gaon and Chassid by the name of Rabbi Mendel Chaim. The Rebbe Rayatz calls him Hagon, HaChassid, HaTalmid, Hagon, HaChassid, Harav. HaTalmid, the Mendel Chaim, Mendel Chaim, the love of nation. He was killed on Kiddush Hashem in 1919 in the pogroms. He was murdered on Kiddush Hashem because he wouldn't walk into a church. Rabbi Mendel Chaim was a very, very big chassid. He was an incredible God. There was a chassid, a Tomim in Lubavitch, whose name was Avram David Pevzner, not to be confused with Avram Baruch Pevzner. Avram David Pevzner passed away at 34 years of age. And in those 34 years, he lived 100 years. He was an incredible mind, an incredible heart, and an unbelievable chassid. The Frierdiker Rebbe writes about this of Avram David Pevzner, Harav, HaChassid, HaTalmid Muvhok. He calls the Mendel Chaim, he calls HaTalmid. Avram David, he calls the Talmud Muvhok, a diligent, a steady Talmud. Meaning Avram David was a Talmud of the Rebbe Rashab, a Talmud of his Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe says, when Avram David was in Lubavitch, my father did not write his own Maimorim, he trusted Avram David Hanachas. And this book that they found in the Rebbe's library with these 12 Maimorim or 11 Maimorim of the Rebbe Rashab, most of them are from this Tomim of Avram David Pevzner. This Maimir is from the Mendel Chaim. And it's a rather rare Maimir. In other words, if you understand the history of Maimorim, all the Rabbeim say the same Maimorim. This particular Maimir only has 4 or 5 drafts from all the Rabbeim combined. And it's based on a Maimir from the Alter Rebbe, which begins with the words Lahavin Inyan HaAzazel. The Alter Rebbe has a Maimir Lahavin Inyan HaAzazel. The Tzemach Tzedek has such a Maimir. The Rebbe Marash has such a Maimir. And now they found such a Maimir from the Rebbe Rashab. And I learned it over Pesach. And I decided that I have to re-give my shir on the Azazel, because this explanation on Azazel actually works for me. It answers my question. For years and years and years, Azazel really bothered me. B'chlal, how do you give Klipa a bone to pacify Klipa? That sounds like Avodah Zarah. It sounds like duality. You know, Hashem is strong and Klipa is strong. You keep Klipa busy. So
appease the devil.
Appeasing him, especially Yom Kippur and the Kedusha Kedusha and the Kohen Gadol. Go ahead.
Well, I don't understand your problem with what they're doing exactly.
You're saying Klipa was also part of the Eibishter, so what?
Yeah, but Klipa that's part of the Eibishter is not what it is. When you destroy the Klipa and all you have left is the energy, that's the Eibishter. But the form of Klipa as a form opposes Elokus. And when you're throwing this bone, it says in Pirkei Rebbe, I looked it up today. Pirkei Rebbe is a medrash from the earliest medrash. Elazar ben Hurkenes was one of the rebbes of Rabbi Akiva. You give him sheichet, so you should let you do what you have to do. It really bothers me. This Pirkei Rebbe is brought in the Ramban, it's brought in the Rebbeinu Bechai, it's brought in the Tziyuni, it's brought in the Rikanti. All of the Mekubalim who wrote Pirushim and Chumash struggle with this Azazel. It really bothers them. It mamish bothers them. But in this Maim of the Alter Rebbe, I found what I think is a satisfactory answer. So I'm going to re-give the class. Now I'm very limited with time because you got to daven Ma'ariv and I have to give another class after this one. So I'm going to go through a list of Mefarshim very quickly, okay? What is the meaning of the word Azazel? What is the meaning of the word? Ayin, Zayin, Aleph, Zayin, Aleph, Lamed. Azazel. Rashi says it means cliffs. Tough, hard, cliffy mountains. That's what Rashi says. Okay? The Rashbam says it means goats. And he says a weird pshat, which is not halachic at all, but the Rashbam, don't ask any kachas on the Rashbam. Azazel means that outside of the city, in the fields and the pastures and the forests, you have wild goats. Azazel means the place where the wild goats live. And according to this Rashbam, if you take him literally, he holds that this goat that was sent to Azazel was not killed, right? The Gemara says they threw it off a cliff. And he was thrown off a cliff. Halfway down the mountain, his body was already dismembered. He wouldn't get to the bottom alive. According to, which was very cruel. The Rashbam says, they took a goat, they went out into the forest and the fields, they found a herd of wild goats, and they joined him with that herd of wild goats. Azazel means simply a herd of goats. That's all. That's Rashbam, the grandson of Rashi. The Chizkuni says that Azazel means Samuel. Samuel is a malach who you usually don't say his whole name. We call him Samach Mem, right? Everybody knows that every malach's last name is Hashem, Kael, Aleph Lamed, right? Michael, Gavriel, Rifael, Nuriel. So Samuel is Samach Mem. That means the malach of Klipa, Aleph Lamed. Chizkuni says that the goat goes on Klipa. The Rebbe Rasha brings Taka in this Maimer that the shayrish of all of the Klipes, the shayrish of all evil, is called a goat. And in our Parsha, in Parsha's Acharei, when he talks about shadim, talks about demons, he says, they should not bring their kabbanas anymore to seidim. Seidim means goats. That the shayrish of Klipa is goats. So the Chizkuni holds, he brings the Pirkei Rabbi Lezer that I mentioned, that you send Azazel to Samach Mem as a bribe, as an appeasement. The Ramban is incredibly long. The Ramban is a big makobel. The Ramban is very, very disturbed by this Pirkei Rabbi Lezer. And what the Ramban struggles with is the consideration that we're bringing a carbon to Klipa. And he says, he has a whole long discussion. God forbid to think that you're giving a carbon to Klipa. Karbanas you bring only to the Eibishter. What you're giving to Klipa is what actually belongs to Klipa Minadin. What belongs to Klipa Minadin. And I'm going to tell you right away, there's an Abarbanel and a Kliyakar. If you'll go to my website, I'm going to put this class up with the page, with all the PDFs. They have a very interesting pshat, right? Where do Avedas come from? We do an Aveda. Where does it come from? It comes from Klipa, right? So when it comes Yom Kippur, you send the Avedas to where they belong. The Kliyakar says, and the Abarbanel sort of hints at it, that the significance of Azazel is that when it comes Yom Kippur, we take all of our sins, we send them away to Klipa as a declaration. They're not ours. We did them. We sinned. But they're not ours. You know, the famous thing, a Jew cannot sin. The Zohar says, Nefesh ki tachta tva. The idea that a person, even on the lowest level, called Nefesh, could do an Aveda makes no sense. How does a person do an Aveda? And of course the answer is, Ish ki siste ishtei ein adam ever Aveda elam ke nichnas beiruach shtus. If a person does an Aveda, we say, the Gemara says, the halacha is, we call it a shoite or a soite with a shin smolis, that he lost his mind. Yidden cannot do Avedas in their right mind. When a person does an Aveda, means he lost his mind. When you come to Yom Kippur, you take your Avedas and you send them to the Seidim, you send them to the goats, and say, you know what? This is yours. It was always yours. The Jew did it, but even when the Jew did it, it wasn't his, it was yours. So this pshat is Gad Geschmack. It's not a bribe like the Pirkei Rabbi Lezer. It's not a bribe. You're not appeasing Klipa. What you're doing is you're making a statement. Anything in my life which is against Avodas Hashem was never mine. It was always stolen. It was always somebody else's in my reshus, and I'm giving it back to Klipa. It's almost as if I'm saying, when I do an Aveda, I'm a Ganev, and when I send my Avedas to Samuel, I'm giving it back what it is. It has no shaykhs to me. It's a fascinating pshat, which is a makubal from about 700 years ago. What he says basically is that Yom Kippur Hashem doesn't only judge the Jews. He judges the whole world. And on Yom Kippur Hashem gives life not just to the Jews, but to the whole world. So when it comes to Yom Kippur, the Klipa, this is his piece. You're sending this to Azazel because this is his entire. He's got to eat also. This is his piece. So again, he doesn't want to say like the Pirkei Rabbi Lezer that it's a bribe. He says, and it comes to Yom Kippur, Hashem has to provide life to all the creations. He's providing life to Klipa as well. Now, I skipped the Zohar, which in my last class, which is 8 years old, I spoke about at length, that we send the Azazel to Klipa as a statement of dissociating, of separating ourselves from Klipa. We're nothing to do with Klipa. And reason we send our sins to the Azazel to dissociate from Klipa is that Klipa shouldn't bother us. That's basically what he says. Which is, on a certain level, similar to what the Pirkei Rabbi Lezer says. Okay, anyway, I'm done with preliminaries. I just gave you a whole bunch of different pshatim from a whole bunch of different mafarshim. If you want to hear this in long form, go to my website. I'm going to put both classes in the same folder, Mitzvah Hashem. Inside Chassidus.org. Parshas Acharei, Azazel, the first class is from 8 years ago. You can listen to it, you can hear this all in detail. What I want to do with the few minutes that I have left is tell you what it says in this Maimer. It's a very, 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 I think, an interesting, it's an interpretation of Azazel. I read it in the version of the Rebbe Rashab, but I would guess, without looking, I didn't have a chance to look, that it's based on the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek and the Rebbe Marash. And I find it fascinating. I find it very, very fascinating, but I'm going to give you an introduction. And again, my time is very, very limited, so I'll try to do this in the time that I have allowed to me in as efficient a way as possible. There's a story that happened by the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek was a very, very big gun. You don't need me to tell you. He was an incredibly great Talmud Chacham. But Tzemach Tzedek was also a rebbe. He was an Oved Elokim. He served God. He was a very, very serious servant of Hashem. He was holy. He was Davik and Elakus. The Tzemach Tzedek, in a way, was the greatest Rebbe Lubavitch ever had. In a way, he was the greatest Rebbe Lubavitch ever had. By the time the Tzemach Tzedek was a Rebbe, half the Jews in Russia were Chassidim, half the Jews in Russia were Misnagdim, half the Jews in Russia were Chassidim, and of that half, a significant majority were Chabad Chassidim. They said the Tzemach Tzedek had 1 million Chassidim. A lot of these Chassidim, what we would call Chassidi Anusach, they davened in Alter Rebbe Siddur, they put tefillin on like this and not like this. They went to the Fabrengen Yudus Kislev. When the Mashpia said Chassidus Shabbos Afternoon, they sat in. A lot of these people never were in Lubavitch, they never saw the Rebbe, but they followed the derech of Chabad. One of the highlights of the Tzemach Tzedek's Nesius was Shavuos. On Shavuos, all the Lubavitcher Rabbanim, some of whom were the greatest Rabbanim in Russia, which meant in fact the greatest Rabbanim in the world, would come to Lubavitch. The Tzemach Tzedek had a table, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 Rabbanim, Go'onim Adidim, incredibly Talmidei Chachamim. It was like a Yarchei Kala. And they would talk Torah. One of the greatest of these Rabbanim was a Yid by the name of Reb Schneier Zalman Fratkin. In San Diego, there's a shliach called Fratkin. I don't know if he's his descendant, but it's the same last name. Reb Schneier Zalman Fratkin. He wrote a sefer called Charles Tshuvas Teiras Chesed. He was an incredibly great gon, an unbelievably great gon. They say about the Teras Chesed that he would pay for a book. The Moichei Sfarim did not charge him for a book for taking it. The Moichei Sfarim charged him for a book for reading it. Because once he looked at it, he didn't need it anymore, because he had a photographic memory. Whatever he saw, he didn't forget. So if he came to a bookshop and he looked at a book, they charged him for looking at it. And sometimes they'd say you can keep the book, it's junk, but he paid for it anyway because he read it. He had a custom that every Shavuos he came to Lubavitch, and he would bring the Tzemach Tzedek Bikur, or Tzemach Tzedek a gift. Real Chidusha. Bisol Labkovsky told me downstairs that his Chuvas are Chidusha Teira Mitem. He was a real Machadish and Teira. The Teiras Chesed was. Every year he came to Lubavitch. He would go into the Tzemach Tzedek, and he would say Kedusha Teira. Tzemach Tzedek would listen, and Tzemach Tzedek would tell him thank you. The Tzemach Tzedek would acknowledge the veracity of his Kedusha Teira, and this gave him chayes a whole year. That his Rebbe would listen to him say a Chiddush. It was only one Chiddush, and the Rebbe would say thank you. This was him chayes for a whole year. One year he came to Lubavitch and he said his Chiddush and Teira, and the Tzemach Tzedek told him, "Du hast farzena Mishnah. You forgot an explicit Mishnah. An explicit Mishnah. If he knew every single Pirush or Rishon and Achar by heart, he certainly knew Mishnah is Baal Peh." He says, "Rebbe, in what Seder? In what Seder?" He said, "Kachim." And he couldn't chapse it. In what Masech? I think he told him Knisos. In what Pedic? It took him 3 or 4 tries to figure out what his mistake was. And he said a Chiddush and Teira, which was not true, because it was against an explicit Mishnah. And the Teiras Chesed had Gewaltige Chalishas Hadas. He felt terrible that he was able to make such a mistake. When he walked out of the Tzemach Tzedek, he started to cry. He couldn't believe that he should make a mistake like this, forgetting a Torah, but Vad Mishnah, the halacha is. And he said these words. This is the meaning of learning Torah Lishma. And if once in your life you learn Torah Shalei Lishma, this madregi you'll never reach. He said the Tzemach Tzedek couldn't make a mistake. Tzemach Tzedek knew the Mishnah. When you learn Torah just for the sake of the Torah, or to do the Torah a favor, then you have a perfect knowledge of the Torah. If a person once in his life, just once, learned Torah shaloi lishma, he didn't learn Torah for the Torah's own sake, he had another interest, he'll never reach this level. In other words, he said about himself that I once in my life learned Torah shaloi lishma, so I'll never reach a madrege that the Torah is so open for me that I can't make a mistake. This is what the Torah's chassid said. And the question that I have is why not? Why not? I once learned Torah shaloi lishma, I finished, I'm ruined for life. So I'll let you think about it by giving you a different example, right? What's the difference between a tzaddik gomer and a tzaddik sheni gomer? A tzaddik sheni gomer is a tzaddik, and Yetzer Hara is dead. A tzaddik gomer is Yetzer Hara is also dead. What's the difference? The difference is that tzaddik gomer has no ra at all. There's no evil in a tzaddik gomer. Or as we like to say, the tzaddik gomer, the Yetzer Hara is like a second Yetzer Tev. A tzaddik sheni gomer, even on the highest levels, there's a teeny drop of evil in him. It's so teeny tiny, it has no voice, it has no expression. But he's not pure, he's not perfect. There's something about him which is inexact. And this is what the Torah's chassid said. Any person who's Avodah Hashem once in his life lacked exactitude can never become exact in his Avodah Hashem. This is the word. And the irony of it is, the thing about that's funny is this, if you're a tzaddik gomer, how do you daven? Quiet. No tumult. If you're tzaddik she'eini gomer, how do you daven? You make so much noise, and you scream, and you shuckle, you stamp your feet so much, you disturb the whole congregation. Why? Because the tzaddik she'eini gomer feels a little bit of evil inside of himself, and he's fighting with it. The fight comes out in noise. The tzaddik gomer doesn't have anything wrong. If you have nothing wrong, it's quiet. If you have no resistance, if you have no friction, there's nothing inside of you that's incompatible with Avodah Hashem, it comes out quiet. And the Alter Rebbe says, the Rebbe Rashab says in this man, Shabbos Shabbos, and this is the Pshat Azazel. Yom Kippur, all Yidden are in the Madreg of Tzaddik Gomer. Yom Kippur, all Yidden. It's a long maimah, which I don't have time to explain to you now, but Yom Kippur, every Jew is in the level, I'll use a nice word, of fluidity. You know what fluidity means? You know what fluidity means? I'll explain it to you in simple English, okay? There is a phenomenon called electricity, correct? Electricity is created how? Either by using petroleum, right, oil or coal or natural gas to create energy, or if you're lucky, you can use a waterfall, which doesn't require any energy, right? It's a turbine spins and it creates electricity, and so on and so forth, right? And electricity is delivered through wires. Someone asked you a question. We have desert in America, thousands of square miles of desert. If we put out mirrors in these deserts, we can collect enough electricity to feed the energy powers of the whole country.
Elon Musk said
okay, but so why isn't it done? I mean, there's many reasons why. The number one reason is because the oil lobby wants to make money. Since when do they have control over us? This is a different question. But there's an answer. Part of the answer is because if you make electricity near California, you have to ship that electricity to New York through wires. You know what happens as electricity travels through wires? It gets used up. Why? Because the wires are not 100% efficient. If you could create a wire, right now they don't use metal, they don't use copper even, they use glass, they call it fiber optics. They have wires today that are like 97% efficient, 95% efficient. Old wiring, as the electricity travels through the wire, you could lose a quarter of the energy, a fifth of the energy. The energy gets lost, it gets wasted. If you have to ship the electricity from the Niagara Falls to New York City, which is, I don't know, hundreds of miles, by the time it gets here, you lost so much energy in delivering the energy that you didn't save any money. If you could create wires with zero loss of energy, you can save the same energy around the world 25 times and you don't lose any of it. That's called fluid. It's called zero friction. I'm going to give you a physical example of zero friction. When a train runs on a track, when a car runs on a road, right, the ground, the earth is not perfectly smooth, so there's bumps, right? Could you make a train that could run with zero bumps? They have it. It's trains that run on magnets. Because trains that runs on magnets, the car never touches the rail. The whole chap is that there's a pole, and around it is a magnet, and they repel each other. It's like they're pushing each other away. So the train is literally floating through the air. It's on a track. But because of the nature of the the pole on which the train is gripped and the magnet which sits around it, they never touch. That's called fluid. There's no friction because there's no physical touch.
There still is.
A tzaddik gomor, I'm sure you're right, but it's a good mashal nevertheless. A tzaddik gomor is frictionless. 1 second. Yom Kippur, every Jew is the madreg of tzaddik gomor, frictionless. He calls it Avodah העצמי. But he says we're not frictionless. You know why? Because if once in our lives we did one Aveda, that with dem madrege came on the Shen Zukumen, like the story of the Teres Chesed. A person who once had one thing which was not perfect, you'll never achieve perfection. And the whole concept of Yom Kippurim is that we should achieve perfection. So if Yom Kippur, every Jew is madrege of tzaddik gomor, the Alter Rebbe doesn't use those oisias. I am. He uses the oisias ineg ha'atzmi. So on Yom Kippur, every Jew should have an avodah Hashem which is completely fluid. It's impossible because there's evil inside of themselves. So now the Alter Rebbe sort of makes up a chiddush. Why does the evil inside you disturb you? If I have evil inside me, why is it going to interfere with my fluidity, with my lack of friction? Why? Why? One way to say it is because it's my enemy. Another way to say it is because it's bothering me, it's criticizing me. So the Alter Rebbe says this is Azazel. It's a Bible from the Alter Rebbe, which I didn't look up in the original. The Rebbe Rashab is based on the Alter Rebbe. This is Azazel. Comes Yom Kippur, we're all supposed to be in a madrega. We have with total fluidity, no friction. So what we do is we come to Klipa and we give Klipa something to tell Klipa, today don't bother me. Today don't bother me. There's something about me which is inexact. Today don't bother me, so that I today can be in the madrega of tzaddik gomor. So obviously we're not bringing a korban to Klipa. What we're doing on Yom Kippur is we're saying to Klipa, today I want to be removed from you. I'm giving you this, not that I'm not bribing you. I'm giving you this so you today shouldn't bother me. Leave me alone. So the aspects of me which are not perfect are not disturbing me, so I'm able to serve the Eibishter, so I'm able to serve Hashem on the madrega of Yom Kippurim, which is with zero fluidity. So we're not bribing Klipa, number one. We're certainly not throwing Klipa a bone, number two. What we're doing is we're allowing Yidden who are not perfect to also be in the madrega of Yom Kippur tzaddik gomor. Meaning to say, if every Jew in the world was the madrega of Kohen Gadol, maybe you don't need an Azazel. Or to say it in other words, when the Kohen Gadol sent the goat to the Azazel, he did it on Yom Kippur, and he did it. But he did it on behalf of those Jews who are not in his madrega. He did it on behalf of those Jews who are in a lower madrega than him. They have a shaykhas to Klipa, and because they have a shaykhas to Klipa, they cannot achieve by themselves fluidity. There's no way. So that they also should experience the Yom Kippur that he's experiencing. So it answers all of the questions. For the Kohen Gadol himself, you don't need an Azazel. Because the Kohen Gadol himself, we're going to assume, was a tzaddik gomor. The Kohen Gadol sends the goat to the Azazel that we should have the experience that he has, even though we're not in his madrega. And this was a satisfactory answer to this concern that I had about Azazel, and now I got to run. We'll continue another time.